Welcome to Experts Unleashed, a podcast that aims to uncover how professionals and entrepreneurs transform their experience into income while making a positive impact in the world. I'm your host, Joel Irway, and over the past 4 years, I've helped entrepreneurs develop and launch their expert-based businesses to grow past 6 and 7 figures per year. Now, a professional expert serves their community through paid training, education, or service, and this podcast will show you how to design and execute your plan to become a 6 or 7 figure expert without a big team. So, let's get started. What's going on, experts? It's Joel here with a very special episode of Experts Unleashed, and today you are in for an amazing interview. I just hopped off the horn with the very talented, very special Tracy Matthews, and we talked about all things entrepreneurship today. Me and Tracy were like two peas in a pod. We had not had a conversation before this interview, but as soon as we hopped on the call, I knew that we were basically two completely identical people. Tracy is a natural-born visionary, and what we talked about today was how she took her company and she ran her first company for 11 years and it went bankrupt during the crash of 2008. We talked about that and the lessons that she learned from that to then transform what she thought was only one way to monetize her passion, to monetize her expertise, and came back from that and turned the most profitable business she has ever run within 18 months of that bankruptcy. This was an incredible episode of resilience, determination, and just ultimately figuring out where opportunity lies. We talk about the expert's curse as well. She calls it something different. But as I've mentioned before, it's very important to have somebody have a second set of eyes look at your situation. Now, Tracy is a jewelry designer and mentor to creative visionaries and the host of the top-rated Thrive by Design podcast. As a jewelry industry veteran, she's been featured in InStyle, Elle, US Weekly, and Real Simple, and on the Today Show, Entrepreneur on Fire, and Creative Live. As the Chief Visionary Officer of Flourish and Thrive Academy, she's passionate about helping other highly creative types launch, grow, and scale profitable jewelry and fashion brands. She lives in New York City, loves to travel, and secretly wants to be the lead singer in a band. Without further ado, let's jump into today's episode. Hey, what's up, experts? It's Joel here with a very, very special episode of Experts Unleashed. And guys and gals, I'm pumped. I just got off my pre-interview with the wonderful Tracy Matthews from Flourish and Thrive Academy. She is our guest today, and we are going to be talking about some very amazing things that I think you are going to be absolutely stunned and you're going to love. Now, Tracy is the Chief Visionary Officer of the company that I just introduced her as, Flourish and Thrive Academy. Tracy, welcome to the show.
Joel, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So we just chatted for a few minutes before our interview, and you talked about what your passion is. You talked about what you really love doing. You call yourself the Chief Visionary Officer, and I'm probably very similar to you, and I didn't tell you that beforehand. You like to start things, but you have a hard time completing them. But give our audience a quick introduction to who is Tracy, what is your superpower, what are you working on right now that gets you out of bed each morning?
Yeah, so I'll start with sort of like who I am really quickly and what I'm passionate about, and then I'll tell you my superpower after that. And if I forget, tell me later. Anyway, I started my career in the jewelry industry. I learned to make jewelry when I was in college back in the 90s. And it was never a matter of if I was going to start my own business, it was just a matter of when. I come from a long line of entrepreneurs in my family. The idea of working for someone else to be a designer was never even crossed my mind. I was like, oh, I'm just going to do this for myself. So that journey led me to building a business up starting in the late 90s all the way through the early 2000s, having a lot of frustrations on the way, but having a lot of successes. And it ultimately resulted in me closing my business and a huge business failure that landed in bankruptcy. But I don't really look at it as a failure now because it led me to where I am now. And it was one of the biggest business lessons I've ever had. But there was a time when I considered it that and considered it that way. So I launched a new company really quickly and realized through that course of that 11 years that I had my first business, Tracy Matthews Designs, that part of the things that were holding me back was that I was really good at coming up with ideas and creating things and designing collections. But the things that really bogged me down were actually having to follow through on getting the final projects done, or the little minute details that you had to do to like manage a business or managing team, like all those things like sucked my creative energy. And so I found that as I was building that business, that my time was pulled away from the things that were the most important things that I actually had to be doing to be building the business, which was business development, coming up with strategic ideas for growing the business and marketing and getting ourselves out there. Instead, I was like really stuck in the business, and it was like basically sucking the life out of me. And it wasn't until I could step away for a moment that I realized that was really what happened. And then obviously there's like some structural, or maybe not obviously, but there was also some things that I did because I'm not really a systems person. And I probably could have set my business up for success a little bit better in the beginning. So I learned a lot from that. But having that hindsight and understanding, I realized what I really loved to do was work with clients, come up with ideas and sell actually, like, and not in a salesy way, but by providing value to people. And so when I started my new jewelry company, I realized that those were the things that I wanted to focus on the most. And so I immediately found a way to set the company up where I could outsource the parts of the pieces of the business that I didn't want to work on and get even just a little bit of support. I only had someone for 5 hours a week doing the things that I was really challenged with, like uploading blog, like things that seem so silly, but it's hard for me, like uploading a blog post or figuring out how to automate emails and stuff like that, because that's just not something that I'm good at. And I was able to like really grow and scale that business really quickly. Within 18 months, I had the most profitable month in my entire career, even though my sales were much less than my previous business. We were doing close to $1 million in revenue in that business. And I just saw like, wow, when you set a business up in a way that is really fits in alignment with what you value and what's important to you, and in alignment with like really who you are as a human being, and you don't fight against that, that so much can open up and so much can expand. And so over the years, I'd been approached by other jewelry designers and makers who wanted advice on how to grow their business. I had a pretty big following. I was in about 350 stores around the world and a ton of press. And so for a while, like I was very well known. And
is this your new company, or is this the one?
This was in my first company.
So the one that you were working on for 11 years, right?
Yeah, that one. And so in hindsight, I had like designers who were following me, just like I followed designers who, when I was starting, like admired people. I was like a fangirl of some people. And they wanted consulting. They wanted help getting their business going. And I would offer them a consulting package and they say, oh, it's just too much of an investment right now. I'm just starting up. So I said, just was thinking to myself, I was in a jazz club with my friend, Robin Kramer, who was also in the industry. And we're talking, I'm like, Robin, I have this idea. I want to start an academy where we teach jewelry designers and makers specifically how to run successful businesses based on everything that I know and everything that you know about growing the dog-eared business, because she was in the industry too, but from a sales perspective, and help them kind of cut this learning curve in half. Because one of the things that I always regretted and felt was missing in the early years of entrepreneurship for myself was that sense of community and feeling very alone. Like I didn't have anyone who understood my plight, because I had a lot of people around me who were entrepreneurs or who own their own businesses, but they didn't understand the unique challenges of a jewelry company. Because it's very different having a service-based business or investing in real estate. It's very different than, or building a restaurant chain is very different than having a jewelry company with a lot of inventory and stuff like that. It's very unique challenges. So in 2012, we launched Flourish and Thrive Academy, and we support thousands of jewelry designers and makers and help them run successful businesses and focus on what they're really good at and expand and continue to get their brand and their voice out into the world, which is super fun.
So a couple quick questions for you.
Yes.
That's an awesome story, by the way. And I love the timeline. You'd mentioned that. So one of the things that I picked up on was like, as a visionary, and we can have an amazing conversation because I swear we are two peas in a pod, right? Love starting things, hate finishing them. You said that you set up a company to outsource the parts that you hated, and within 18 months, you had your most profitable month ever. Was this another jewelry business, or was this part of your consulting, or like what business was that?
Yeah, I guess I wasn't clear on that. It was another jewelry business. So I have I have a jewelry business still. I design engagement rings and wedding bands and a lot of heirloom redesign. I love it. It's a passion of mine. It's awesome because it's set up in a way that I make full-time income, just working very part-time. And now my executive assistant kind of helps me run that. So it's fun.
So you still run it? It's still...
Yeah, it's still there. I am very selective with who I take on as clients now, just because I only want to work with people who are aligned with kind of the design that I do and the budget that I have. And I think for the type of jewelry that I deliver, it's very reasonable, but you get all types of people coming who want an engagement ring for $500. That's not what I do. So I'm like, go to Zales. They can help you out over there. Just really working with the people that alignment with the process that I do and what I offer.
Awesome.
So it's fun.
Okay. So 2012, you launched Flourish and Thrive Academy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about that and like talk about what you're doing with that now. Like what are some like...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My first idea, this was like sort of at the beginning. I had taken an online course. Like I came from like a traditional business model, which I think because I was selling to stores and online selling at the time I closed my business, which was 2009, was just a brand new thing. So we would get some sales on our website like 2007, 8, and 9, but it wasn't like a huge part of our business. And so this idea of like using your website as a tool to actually like really build a business was a new concept for me. Like we needed it, but most of my business was done by doing trade shows and selling to stores and building like traditional sales relationships with people where we would go show our product. I had taken an online course about building a business using your website basically as a tool. And that like opened up my eyes into this whole new online world. And I was just like, that's a thing. Like, it's so crazy because I talk to my friends who are still like buyers for stores and they're like, what do you do? Like, no one really understands what I do, even though we understand it because that's what we do.
Yep.
And so I had this idea. I'm like, they can't afford the one-on-one consulting. That's not even really like my preferred jam because I'm a one-to-many person. And so maybe I could just design these courses where people could come and take the course. We'd offer some live feedback so they can, if they're stuck, we can answer questions for them and help them get to the next step. But that was really how the company was sort of founded. We had a signature course called Laying the Foundation. The course that I wanted to launch when we first started was called Multiplier Profits, which is really about the visionary stuff I was talking about earlier, learning how to set your business up in the right way and putting the back end systems, the production systems, the hiring systems in place so that you can really do what you're good at.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not a sexy thing. So we're like, we'll sell branding and collection development first and see what happens. And that's still our number one course. It was a good call. Now we have several courses running the gamut, but our main focus right now is our membership community, the Diamond Insiders, and our high-level coaching program called the SOS Accelerator. And these programs are really built around community over competition and creating a platform for designers to come in and not only learn, but get support. Because it's not just enough to learn, you have to actually take action in order for anything to work in your business. And what I found in my industry in particular is that a lot of the people that I mentor don't believe that they're good enough, and they feel like they operate a lot in what I call maker mindset, where they're like making, doing, instead of selling, vision kind of things. And they keep themselves small because of fear, or they think that they can't put themselves out there, or they're afraid. And so a lot of my work is really helping them with this community aspect overcome those mindset issues that hold them back from success. Because what I know, and it's funny because I was in a class this morning called The Class by Taryn Toomey, and it's like a combination of like physical activities, but a lot of mindset and spiritual stuff. And one of the things that we were talking, like that I was thinking as I was reflecting on coming out of that class was, wow, I've grown so much. I grew so much in the last 10 years or like 8 years than I even did in the first 11 years that I was in business. And I think the reason being is because I was really focused on the inside than the outside of like strengthening the tool to overcome and become resilient. And I think that, especially for highly visionary types or really creative types who have great ideas and they are driven and really do have a passion to move their business forward, is something that we can easily get caught up in beliefs that aren't really true about ourselves that actually hold us back. And so, I mean, if I look back and reflect, like I think the thing that's helped me and many of the designers that I mentor kind of grow quickly is the inner work as opposed to just the doing stuff, because that's all great, but you always fall back into the same patterns if you don't change what's on the inside.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, like, so you mentioned something when you were talking about your academy, which I thought was fascinating. You said community over competition. What does that mean? Like, talk about that.
So, I mean, there's many communities using that tagline, but it's really the motto.
Really? I've never heard it before.
Yeah, I think there's a couple other, I mean, I hadn't heard of it before. We were using it, but then other people started using it. So I'm not claiming that I was the first. I don't know. You know, I think it's a thing. When I was an emerging designer and just starting out, I had a friend who we had the same rep or sales rep for a while. And we would go to dinner and I asked her a question. I'm like, where'd you guys get those hang tags? Like, we're looking for a new hang tag vendor. Hang tags are like the little thing that you stick on the back of a necklace or a piece of jewelry that would identify your brand. And so like it has like a logo stamp or something on it. They're inexpensive. Like you buy them, it costs like for, I don't know, 50 cents or something like that when you're buying. I don't even know what they cost anymore. But anyways, they're things that you buy in bulk and they're not unique because they're not things that are like a unique design. And multiple vendors have them. I was just looking for a new one. And she wouldn't share that with me. I thought it was weird because what they had wasn't anything super special. And it was like what a lot of other people were having. I was just trying to source a new vendor. And it got me to thinking, if someone I'm such good friends with, because we would go to these dinners like at trade shows all the time, wouldn't help me with a vendor, then like, what's the point of having these friendships? Like whatever, like that kind of goes back to that old mindset. Like if I give up my intellectual property,
secret sauce,
yeah, what I'm doing on the inside, that I'm going to lose my competitive edge, which I don't believe in that because no one can be you. No one can design like you. No one has your same message or story or whatever it is. And so that wasn't the first time something like that happened. And I noticed like later in the years, like a good friend of mine, she got this huge order from Anthropology and she noticed that we were using the same stones and she had run out. And she called me up. She's like, do you have any more of those? And that was one of the first time we think we had a strand. I'm like, we have one strand. Do you want it? She's like, I need a lot more than that. So I was just like, but that's kind of like the beginning of sort of the breakdown of that. But what I wanted to really create was an opportunity for people to come together and not be afraid that if they shared information and shared how to do things, that it was going to jeopardize their business anyway, because it won't, because no one can be you. No one is your brand. You are not even your brand in some cases. So what is it that's different? Like everyone ultimately sources from the same types of vendors anyway. Why not share the wealth and help everyone rise higher? And what I found is that and you've probably seen this too in the groups that you're in, Joel, is that when people lift each other up and people are like each other's biggest cheerleaders and they're actually excited for people and sharing, everyone wins. Like their businesses get better, whoever they're helping's businesses get better. And it's really those people who continue to move forward and take action that have success ultimately anyway. So what's the point of not sharing things or trying to be closed off?
I think the term is the rising tide floats all boats or something like
totally.
that.
Exactly. And my co-founder, Robin, would say things a lot like good givers are good getters. And so like the more you give, the more you get kind of thing. It's probably a quote attributed to someone. I have no idea, but she says that a lot. So that's sort of the basis of why we have community. It's awesome because it's really solid. It's strong. And I love helping people. So it's fun.
And you said it before is you have to find the right people who align with that mindset because you can almost, in my experience, right? So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but from my experience, you can kind of draw a line between like, if you put a whole pool of people in a room, you can draw a line of asking that question. Like, do you believe in helping or do you believe in protecting your IP? Yeah. But sharing versus you conquering the world. And
you can, I'm sure. Yeah. I also think that probably in certain cases, like with technology and stuff, you have to preserve certain intellectual property, but there's business concepts that could be shared. There's certain things that probably do have to, I wouldn't reveal the information behind something you're trying to get patented. So patented sooner or something like that. But I don't know. I feel
no, we're on the same page. You do have to be selective, but for something that's common knowledge, I don't want to say common knowledge, but it's not your IP. It's just kind of like you figured out how to solve a common pain point that lots of other people are going through. It'll come back to you in good karma for sure.
Absolutely.
So I want to rewind it now, right? So I want to talk about, you have a lot of fascinating things in your story that you've already talked about. And I want to rewind it because what we focus on in this podcast is opportunity. We are entrepreneurs at heart. We are visionaries. And I want to show people how to spot and create opportunities through your experience, your professional life. I mean, you've got a bunch of very interesting things. I mean, your first company went bankrupt. You launched a new one very, very quickly. And you even said, so I'm going to repeat a couple of things that I wrote down from your path. And I want to hone in on one of them, but I'm not sure what it is. So I just want to kind of repeat what I've written down so far. You talked about how you hated being stuck in minute details. It would suck your creative energy. It's like, that was really, I totally related that. And you also said that you set up your company to outsource the parts that you hated. I want to talk about that real quick, right?
Sure.
Because for somebody who's a visionary, and this is something that I'm working on in my business currently, that's easier said than done, especially for somebody who doesn't like finishing. And when you're talking about setting up systems and processes, like you had your highest profit producing month within 18 months of really setting this up. And correct me if any of this is not 100% accurate, but that's what I wrote down. How did you start with the end in mind? How did you start with those processes, or just take me through that?
I knew that if I wanted someone to come in and do like, I'm using bookkeeping as an example. Most bookkeepers know what to do, but like for many years I had an office assistant who would just come in and do stuff. Like I needed to give them the step-by-step. Or I think where it became really important for me is having like step-by-step for production and expectations of how things needed to be completed. And also creating systems for follow-up with my customers, because that shortened my amount of time. So it's basically what I've done, because I still am not very good at documenting systems. It's just documenting what I'm doing as I'm doing it and then swiping into a file. And so it's not like revolutionary, but it is something that has really helped me kind of cut down the amount of time I'm spending on something. Now, as far as the outsourcing goes, I'm making jewelry. So I found a team of people that could do it all here in New York. And before my previous business, we had a hybrid where we outsourced some of it to part of it to manufacturers or piece workers, as we call them, because they're like people who would take some jewelry and bring it home and bring it back. And people who worked in my office. And so who are more like employees. So there's different ways to look at outsourcing. Sometimes I use the term outsourcing as just meaning anyone who's going to do something for you and get it off your plate. So really quickly, even though I had no money to do this, I figured out if I could just pay $100 a week to this guy to do some of the tech stuff, because that was really hard for me. I didn't even understand how to do it. So what I would have him do was document what he was doing. So in case of emergency, I could go and fix something if I needed to. And I offered him like 5 hours a week. He's a college student. He ended up working for me full time. We were together for about 5 or 6 years all in, but started like 5 hours a week. He's just a college student, wanted to make some extra cash. And it grew into this much bigger relationship where he ended up becoming my director of marketing for a while. So what that allowed me to do was to potentially take maybe what took him 5 hours was probably 15 hours of my time. And I was able to bring in a lot more money. And so that was how that kind of shift happened. So there, in the beginning, it was taking a leap of faith. And I had some other like backup things in place. I was teaching yoga, so I knew I wasn't going to not be able to feed myself or anything like that at the time. But it was just like taking this leap. Okay, I'll spend $100 a week to have someone take some stuff off my plate. And how is that going to free up my time so I can get more clients? Immediately, I got offered this amazing opportunity to design collections for a $400 million company. They're a $400 million company at the time. Now they're probably much bigger than that. I have no idea. But that brought in another $5,000 of cash every single month.
Nice.
And so those kinds of things, it's like, I think people are like, I can't afford it. I can't afford it. But can you really not afford it? Are you looking at it the right way? And if those hours were freed, how could you spend that time doing the stuff that you're better at that's going to bring money into your business?
Yeah. And so for me, I spent a lot of money building systems or hiring somebody to help build systems outside of the webinar agency. And it was, I mean, I don't want to say it was a failure. I hired somebody who was brilliant. Her name was Taryn, and she lived in New Jersey, super, super intelligent. But like, I failed at it because we didn't even have our own systems. And I'm like, okay, I'll pay you to build something that we haven't created yet. And anyway, I like talking about that because I just like, especially I have a hard time finishing. And I'm like, all right, I expected, and this might've been my downfall. I expected somebody to finish something for me. And I don't know. It was a mess. I'll just leave it.
I have a good story about this. Want me to tell you real quick?
Yeah, let's go.
So year like 6 or 7 in business, I was in San Francisco. I live in New York City now, and I moved my company in 2006 to New York. So maybe this was 2005, 2006. My business was growing like crazy. We were getting into some really big stores. And that was part of the reason why I moved to New York. I asked my bookkeeper at the time, she's like, you guys need some systems in place. Like, you're just like winging it like all over the place. And I'm like, I didn't understand that was like a really important thing. Cause I'm one of those people, I'm like, here's the idea. Let's go with it. Let's just like figure it out. but I wasn't documenting like necessarily how to do that. And I said, can you create the systems for us? She said, well, I've done that before, Tracy, but let me tell you, it doesn't work. And here's the reason why. I'll create all these systems in a way that I would do it, but that doesn't mean that you will use them. And then you'll spend all this money and it's like a waste of my time and it's a waste of your money. And if it's not something that you're actually doing, then it's never, just like I said, a waste of time and money. So there was no one out there really teaching like how simple it is to document what you're doing, which can be as simple as recording your screen or talking into a recorder or shooting a quick video that can be later transcribed. And we didn't have as many tools back then. And it seems so daunting to sit down and like have to spend time to write out a system when no one really talked about documenting it as you go, which makes it so much simpler.
Yeah. It's its own art. Like that's one of the things that just sounds so simple. It's like, oh, you just need to document your process. Like, okay, sounds simple, right? But
thing is to just talk into a recorder while you're doing it, haven't transcribed.
Yep.
That's what I do. I like all my systems. I'm like, Abby, here, figure it out, make it into something.
Yep. So let's go back now. I want to talk about the bankruptcy, right?
Yep.
So you had a company for 11 years and it went belly up, right? What did you learn? Like what was happening that, how do I explain it? Or how do I ask this? Like, I guess let's just kind of go back to it.
Maybe.
What's that?
What caused it?
Yeah. What caused the bankruptcy and what did you learn from it? Let's start there.
A lot of those. Yeah. So, I mean, I learned a lot from it. Let's see. Okay. So I started my company in 98 by myself, just trying to figure things out, hustling, getting things done. And we've talked about this a lot. I'm highly visionary. I just like feel like sometimes I'm just throwing spaghetti against the wall to see what sticks. And then if it sticks, then I'm like, okay, let's go in that direction kind of thing.
Yep.
I'm really good at making stuff happen. Like I'm really good at generating revenue and making sales. And I hate when people think of sales as like a negative thing because really like it's always been for me about providing value and giving people what they want, which is in some cases beautiful jewelry and now to run a better business or whatever it is. And so back then, like I was just going. I'm a 10. If you know about the Colby, I'm a 10 on Quick Start and the Colby. And I'm like a 2 or 3 on everything else. So I'm just like all Quick Start, all moving forward. And so I leave this like almost like trail of stuff behind me that was never really cleaned up. And so what ended up happening is over time, I started hiring a team and I didn't train them properly. So like a lot of my time was spent talking to them and trying to help them figure out what their job was. So that was like first clue that it was wrong. And this is where I was talking about how I was managing team most of the time instead of letting them like really thrive in their roles. And then financial stuff started to come up. So we're getting these bigger opportunities. Like we would get like $100,000 orders from Anthropology and those need to be financed somehow. And so we worked with a factor at the time, and a factor is basically a company that would finance your receivables. So when you get a big order like that, you can have some cash coming in the door right away so that you can continue your cash flow through.
Right, because they're not paying you a check for $100,000 right up.
No, it takes them like anywhere from like 30 to 90 days. But you're you're paying for this stuff like 60 days before. So, or sometimes 90 days before. So it's 6 months without the money. And so, but you're also trying to produce other orders and pay your team and keep your business going. And so started like, there was times when it was becoming a cash flow issue to take these bigger orders. But the real thing that caused the bankruptcy was 2008. I mean, we were highly leveraged in the first place. I'd taken a risk and done a bunch of trade shows because the ones that I was doing were really expanding and my business was growing so much that I was like, oh, do another trade show. Sure. Say yes to going on to QVC and taking these really slim margins, or say yes to this. I was just saying yes to everything. And so I was spending a lot of money and then in like way in advance. And I didn't see the return coming right away. I'm like, I'll figure it out. And because I was just so working in my business, I wasn't really seeing what was happening around me. And then later in the year, sales started to dip over the previous year. And I was just like, I thought in the beginning, like, oh, it's me and my collection. I got to adapt and change. And then the trends in the industry were changing a little bit to more of a fast fashion is what they call it, where people were wanting like cheap things that they could buy and it was inexpensive. I always have designed like very personal collectible jewelry that is not cheap. At that time, I wasn't designing extremely expensive jewelry, but it wasn't cheap. And I think it was like a variety of those factors so that when we took a bunch of orders in the summer months for holiday, and then the market crashed. When was that? In September or October that year? something like that. And no one bought in October. October was always our busiest month. All of the orders were getting canceled. We weren't getting paid for the orders that we had shipped. 3 of my key accounts that we had big open orders with, and they had the jewelry filed for bankruptcy and just had no cash. And so several months before I'd started working with this consultant, just to give you an idea, the year before I'd shipped $150,000 in product in October. October of 2008, I shipped 10.
Wow.
So that's huge. I mean, that's devastating to a business. We had to immediately lay off people that we had just hired to replace positions. It was a devastating time for me and for a lot of people. But so I had hired this consultant. We were regrouping and figuring out what to do. I'm like, how am I going to even do payroll? So we had to talk about restructuring what we were doing and what do we do with the debt, because you really can't pay it off anyway. So is it worth it to pay any of it off at this point until you figure out what you're doing? And this was happening to a lot of companies. They had to negotiate with their creditors. Our lines of credit got closed. They just were getting closed because of what happened with other people. So then our cash flow just kind of stopped. So I had to take this really hard look, do I want to fight for this company and try to figure out? And I was already so miserable anyway, or do I want to start over? And it wasn't an easy decision. It took me probably about 6 months to make that decision. But in the meantime, my sister was working with me. We just tried to figure out what could we do in the moment to just keep things going until we decide.
Yep.
And so about 6 months later in the spring, we decided to close the company. And our final month in business was in August of 2009. I spent the rest of the year winding down and getting rid of inventory. And then I think maybe 2 years later, we had to file for bankruptcy. So there's waiting periods and stuff. I don't know why, but it takes a long time. This stuff takes time. So it was one of the hardest things ever. But one of the best things that I ever did was hire this consultant, because I was so in my own, I was so caught in the middle of this, basically that was so proud of what I created. Then I was so ashamed of what I had created at the same time. So I was very conflicted and confused, because I did do a lot of things right. I built an amazing brand that had the attention of so many celebrities and magazine editors and all that stuff. I was doing a lot right. And the sales were there to back it. There was gaps in the way the business was set up. And it was wreaking havoc on my joy for the business and my feeling alive. And I wanted to feel alive again, and I wasn't. So that's what visionaries should do. They should always feel alive and excited about what they're doing.
100%. So when you launched your new company, right? I'm assuming, so correct me if I'm wrong, this is going to be assumption. So if I went bankrupt, and I only know this because you said you're clearly out on the other end, you are doing much, much bigger things now, right? So when you came out and you pivoted, what did you tell yourself? This is what I'm going to do differently. And what was that thing, and what made the biggest, or did you have multiple things that you said you wanted to do differently?
There was a lot of things that I wanted to do differently. The first thing that I wanted to do was to decide what it was that I wanted my life to look like. I think what I really missed in my first business is one of the reasons why I wanted to start a business is because I was slaving away at retail and always working over the holidays and on weekends, because that's when you make most of your money. And I knew after I'd taken this jewelry class when in college that I was going to start a business. I was afraid to take the leap though. And so the pain got so great that I finally started a business, because I didn't want to work on weekends and the holidays. And I was still doing that even when I was an entrepreneur. So I wasn't very clear on what really mattered the most to me. What mattered the most to me then was freedom and independence, and to be able to do my own thing and to build a big brand that everyone knew about and be a recognized jewelry star in the world, I guess. But now what's more important, it wasn't so much the acclaim or the validation of having people knowing who I was. It was really about having a profitable, successful business that was making enough to be able to support my New York lifestyle and my love of travel and my love of wanting to go spend 2 weeks in California with my family or whatever, and still be able to work. And something that was going to be easy, that I wasn't stressed out all the time or feeling like I couldn't do things like find a partner or something like that, because all my time was spent working. So that I got really clear on what it is that I wanted. And when I was working with Phil, my consultant, he really helped me see, he kept asking me these questions, what do you love? And when I got more clear on that, which was really working with the customers, designing and being a part of this, designing pieces that people actually feel were meant for them, that they're collecting and cherishing for the rest of their lives. That became the most important thing. And all the other stuff kind of fell away. So like, I'm like, how can I build a business that figures that out? And obviously having like the structure and on the back end and a business model that is profitable and I can make money.
I'm assuming that had to have been a big piece, was changing the business model, right?
It's huge. So I stopped doing wholesale. I still think that wholesale is an amazing business model. It just, in order to make the kind of income that I wanted to make, you have to work like 4 times harder than what I do now. So
can you just give me a quick 30-second description of when you say wholesale, for anyone who might not be in retail, like what was the pain that caused it so you couldn't build this lifestyle?
Well, it's just that you have to sell a lot of volume in order to make money. And nowadays things are changing and a lot of stores are taking product on consignment. They're not actually buying the product. So you're basically becoming a bank for stores. It's different. The margins are much smaller because I would sell the product for the same if I was selling it from my own website as the store would be selling it. So they have to make money. So you're selling it to them for like 50% off, which is a normal wholesale margin or less than that. It's a lot more work because the number of units that you have to produce are more to scale. And so like I could make, I'm just going to throw out some numbers here, $1 million on a wholesale business doing bridge price point jewelry, which was like $50 to $300 at retail, and ship thousands of units a month in order to do that. Or I could work in fine jewelry, working just with custom clients and meeting people just out in the world who I end up working with and starting sales conversations with them just by helping them out.
Yeah.
And make 5 pieces a month and make less money, maybe a couple $100,000 a year, but make way more profit and have a better life. It wasn't hard. It was easy.
So out of curiosity, it sounds like you identified the leverage points that you didn't have in the previous business and you knew you needed. So is this what your consultant helped you kind of uncover? Because you said you gave that consultant a lot of credit. You said one of the greatest things that I could have done was work with that consultant. Did they help you see this or pivot to this?
He did. I mean, he was asking what I love. And so this is where this new business model kind of came out of. It wasn't something that we were really working on, but he could see that I hated what I was doing. And he's like, he knew that I needed to do something else. And I was so attached to keeping that old business open for a long time. And he's like, I just don't think this is for you anymore. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was like one of the first moments that I think that it's okay to change your mind and do something different. Doesn't mean that what you did before sucked or was wrong. It just means that what you want now is something different. And I will probably pivot again. I'm thinking about launching a ready-to-wear collection that I saw on my site and maybe do wholesale again, but it will be done in a very different way and very selective and controlled. So
did you even know that new opportunity existed? Like, did you?
I didn't even think of it. I was like, because the only way that I ever thought about selling jewelry was to stores. Like that was the only way you could do it back then. But the internet has changed everything. And now as people who are selling amazing products, we have opportunities to reach so many more people using our websites as a tool. This is what my whole coaching program is about. I've worked with people in Australia, New Zealand, all over Europe as clients for my jewelry. And then of course the US and Canada. And I don't think I've worked with anyone in South America, but we have this amazing opportunity to reach people everywhere who like what we do. And it's awesome. And I work with a lot of people in New York, but I wouldn't say that most of my clients are in New York City. A lot of them are in San Francisco or LA or somewhere else. And it's fun to be able to do that.
Yeah. When you say you work with private clients, does this mean you're working with individuals, meaning like you're creating custom jewelry for a specific individual, or not like a business, right?
Yeah. So just individual. I mean, I've done freelance stuff before where I design for other people. Right. It's not something I advertise. It's only through referral. It is a lot of work to do that because there's a lot of specificity that people have. And so, I'm really focused on just working with individuals. Like sometimes they bring me a stone. Sometimes I'm sourcing the stone. A lot of what I do is repurposing heirloom gems and turning that into engagement rings or everyday pieces of jewelry that people want to wear. And so it's all individuals and it's awesome because it's easy.
Yeah. And I'm sure you probably don't have to finance anything, right? They're probably paying upfront.
Everything is paid up front. It's like they have to put a 65% deposit down. And then the only risk I have is the 35% at the end to make sure they pay. And any big stones are paid for up front. So it's good. It's like low risk. I don't think I've ever had anyone not pay me for an entire project.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's got to be one of the biggest pivot points that you made was eliminating that risk. And you mentioned it yourself. And I talk about this all the time. I call it the expert's curse. Like you were so buried in your own, you couldn't see anything. Yeah. You only saw one way. You had a consultant take an outside look and say, maybe he didn't show you this new way, but he's like, listen, like there's more than one way for you to survive. He did show you this?
I mean, he didn't show it to me, but he pulled it out of me.
Yes.
And this is why I think it's so important for us to have mentors and people who can tell us the things that we don't always want to hear, who can spike conversations for us to have thought, think outside of our prison that we create, that's our brain sometimes, or get us to thinking in a different way, because there is so many ways to be successful. And it doesn't, I think a lot of people think, oh, it's just this one way. And for many years, like Etsy has been this huge platforms for makers to sell their product, and everything's changing with that. And all these businesses are going out of business because Etsy's algorithm changed. And I'm just like, let's rethink this and regroup, because there's another way. Let's just focus on that. And there's always another way. I think that's like the one thing that I know. Whatever you're doing isn't working, like focus on something else and make it happen. That's
a very, very common story. It's a very, very common theme that I hear when I talk to experts and entrepreneurs, is like, particularly with people who are like still employed and they're latching on to their business degree or whatever their degree is in college. Like, well, this is the only thing I can do, because it's like they view that degree as the only one way. And it's like, no way, like absolutely not. Like you have to open your eyes completely. Like this whole world of online education, like gives you the ability to learn a valuable skill in like 2 weeks. Like you go on Udemy, like there's lynda.com. Like, man, I could have an entire podcast on like how to launch a new career in 2 weeks. Like I might even create a course on that.
You should. Now I have a question. What's your degree in?
Mechanical engineering technology. Yep.
Okay. My degree is in European studies. I don't know what I was thinking I was going to get, like use that for in the real world. I mean, I guess I studied a lot of art, but I like to travel to Europe.
We could have an entire conversation on like, oh my goodness.
I'll come back and we'll talk about that some other time.
I spent 5 years getting my bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. And I spent like in that 5 years, 1 year was an internship. And by the time I graduated, I lasted 8 months before I'm like, nope, I'm not going to be an engineer. Like, it's just not going to happen. So 5 years of study for 8 months of using it.
That's
anyway,
awesome.
I've documented my entire journey, because everyone, I call it timeline marketing. And that's why I like to do this rewind period, because I like to see like, what were those pivot points? Like I went from being a design engineer to a sales engineer to growing a territory at $2 million a year, and then ultimately discovering the path of entrepreneurship. Like everybody has that story of pivot points. And it's the whole purpose of like why we talk about opportunities, because you said it, like there's more than one way. Like if you think there's only one way, you live in a box, and you need somebody to take a step outside and open the doors for like uncover that box, like open up the walls and say like, listen, this is a big world that we live in. There's a lot of opportunity. Let's take a step back. Let's talk about what you really want to do and figure it out.
And I think what becomes really important in this day and age, and I think when I had the idea to start Flourish and Thrive, and it was really sparked, you know, I was at a conference, and my friend said to me, like, you should do something like this, but for jewelry designers. And I was like, yeah, I've been thinking about it, but thank you for saying it out loud, because it's giving me permission right now. Is that the one thing, there are a lot of people who do online courses and all this stuff now. The thing that I feel like has been really important, not only in what I do in the jewelry industry as a designer and what I mentor and teach designers to do, and what I'm doing in the online space as a mentor and educating people, is that the only thing that is ever going to keep you ahead and keep your business growing is innovation. Because you always have to be coming up. Yep. I hate to say this, but like the next thing, because the market can get saturated at any given moment, and it is saturated with stuff. And I feel grateful that I chose a niche, because there's not a lot of people who are my competitors, really. So I do have competitors, I'm sure, but I don't even know who they are. But at the same time, there's no one who's doing something so niched like this. And it's interesting to see how, when I see something like maybe backsliding a little bit, how I immediately move into action to think of, okay, so where else can we go with this to create the best experience for our customers, and also help them with their businesses even more. That's going to be the most helpful and get them results. Mm-hmm. Like I'm not sitting on like what worked when I started my business, because that's not working anymore.
Yep.
And it's always an evolution, right?
I love it. It's so true. There's so much opportunity out there. And especially with technology today, you have to be innovating faster than you ever thought before. Yeah. Like, especially in the tech world. I mean, a software comes out, and it's
obsolete.
You have now given millions of other developers out there, heaven forbid that your software is actually selling. You are now you're opening it up in the entire world to improve upon it and make it better. And it will be obsolete faster than you can even blink. May have taken you a long time to launch it, and hopefully it does very, very well. But technology has accelerated the rate of globalization of if you've never read the book 0 to 1,
I haven't, but should I?
Peter Thiel. Yeah, it's great. It's a business book, and he's a brilliant mind. But globalization is just happening faster and faster and faster. Yeah. So, well, Tracy, I want to wrap up.
Awesome.
We're running out of time, and
I know
this has been such an incredible.
This has been valuable. I feel like I just like talking, but.
Yeah, no, it's been great. It's been absolutely incredible. I mean, we've talked about a ton of stuff with your life. I mean, we went through the journey of when you launched your first business, ran that for 11 years, then it went bankrupt. But what that did was open the eyes of new opportunity. You got to think outside of the box. And I'm sure it was a very, very difficult time to go through bankruptcy, but it allowed you to see, okay, what do I really want my business to be? We briefly talked about how you need to figure out what your superpower is. And you're a visionary. You know that when you get bogged down in the details, it sucks your creative energy out. Yeah. We talked about that and the importance of building systems so you can just hand it off to somebody else. And when you do that, it opens up new opportunities. I mean, I think you talked about as soon as you hired that guy for $100 a week, you've landed a $5,000 a month gig it opened up that opportunity, right? And now you've got Flourish and Thrive Academy after you obviously launched your consulting in your private client jewelry design business, which is way different than wholesaling. I mean, we just talked about a ton. Is there anything that we left out?
Oh, it's all good. We got a lot out of there. I mean, I don't know if there's anything I left out, but this has been a blast. I love talking about this stuff. So thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So where can people connect with you, Tracy?
Absolutely. You can just head on over to my personal brand website, tracymatthews.com, and feel free to shoot me a little message there. You can find me on Instagram at Tracy Matthews New York.
Awesome. Do you have any podcasts?
I do. Thrive by Design. I guess I should talk about that. Thrive by Design is my podcast. It's so fun. I love bringing this podcast to my community every single week. And while the conversation is technically for jewelry designers, I think there's business advice for just about any kind of entrepreneur or visionary type, especially if you have a product-based business, because we talk about a lot of the unique challenges that we have selling a product. So I'd love to have you head on over there. It's available wherever podcasts are featured.
We'll make sure to include links in the show notes. And Tracy, it's been an absolute blast. So please, if you're listening right now, go connect with Tracy. Let her know that you heard her interview on Experts Unleashed. Just drop her a note and give her some love. This has been an incredible interview, Tracy. Thank you so much for taking time, sharing your expertise, sharing your knowledge. Like I said before, we're two peas in a pod. We have very, very similar minds in terms of visionaries. I hate finishing things. I'm not a finisher. I'm great at running fast and then
I used to be embarrassed that I did that, but it's the truth. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to hide behind trying to not be a visionary anymore.
Awesome. So that's going to do it for our conversation today. Thank you again, Tracy. And for those listening right now, please go reach out to Tracy, follow her podcast, go hit up the links in the show notes, and we will see you on the next episode.
Thank you so much for having me, Joel.
Of course.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we look forward to giving you the next one. Now, if you want additional trainings and content outside of the podcast, I release exclusive video trainings on my Experts Unleashed YouTube channel. And if you'd like to come hang out with thousands of other fellow experts, join our Facebook group community where we do hangouts and webinars to help support you in your journey. Finally, if you'd like my personal help to develop, launch, or scale your business, contact me directly for private consulting opportunities to see if any spots are available. And you can find all of the information above at expertsunleashed.com.